All right, school is in session. So take your seats and turn up the volume. It's time for the smartest fishing show on the internet. This is the show that dives into everything fishing, from tactics and gear to policy and product. Here he is, the fishing professor, Professor Sid Dobrin. So stick around, you might learn something.
Ooga chaka, ooga, ooga, ooga chaka, ooga, ooga, ooga chaka, ooga, ooga, ooga chaka, ooga, ooga. I can't stop this feeling that it's time for another episode of the Fishing Professor Rodcast. Hey, welcome to the Inventive Fishing Professor Rodcast. I am Sid Dobrin, the Fishing Professor, and I am so excited about this week's episode because this week I'm headed to Oviedo, Florida, to the offices of the American Tackle Company, where I'll be talking with Kevin Landers, the marketing manager at ATC, and we'll be talking about fishing rods, rod components, rod building, and many other fishing-related things. And hey, for all my listening crew, if you're an inshore angler, you might also want to check out American Tackle Company's Pro Staff Rattling Shrimp. It's a fantastic shrimp imitator that you should have in your inshore arsenal. And that right there, that's an unpaid, unrequested, unobligated, and totally self-motivated and self-satisfying product endorsement from the Fishing Professor. But hey, in addition to talking with Kevin Landers this week, on this week's Bourbon Break, I'll take up some whiskey-inspired thoughts about Rowan's Creek, Kentucky bourbon. I'll also be counting down my top 10 flying fish imitators, and maybe, if you're lucky, I'll throw in a little bit of info about flying fish themselves, because they are an amazing fish that I could just watch endlessly on the water. So yes, indeed, I am excited about this week's Rodcast, but hey, let's face it, I'm always excited about each week's Rodcast because I'm an excitable boy, just not in that Warren Zevon kind of way. Oh, and man, isn't the Excitable Boy album just amazing? I mean, not just the title track, which is great, but Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, Werewolves of London, Lawyers, Guns, and Money, Like a Martyr, all on the same album. Man, what a great album that is. And what a fantastic songwriter Warren Zevon was. So sad that we lost him back there in '03. Hey, did you know that Florida writer Carl Hiaasen and Warren Zevon were buddies and collaborators? Yeah, Hiaasen actually co-wrote the Warren Zevon song Basket Case, which is a reference to Hyaasen's ninth novel called Basket Case. Hiaasen, by the way, is also a dedicated inshore angler too. But all of that aside, we've got another great Rodcast for you today, so let's get to it. Welcome to the Rodcast. Let's get casting. All right, my listening crew, the Inventive Fishing Inshore Offshore Digital Studio has gone mobile today, and I am in the fantastic American Tackle Company facility in Oviedo, Florida, with Kevin Landers, the marketing manager for AT. Now, AT has the reputation as one of the most innovative manufacturers in recreational fishing. They produce some incredible rod blanks, ferrules, guides, grips, and just about everything else you can think of for building fishing rods, and they've been doing this for nearly 40 years. Now, as an example of their innovation, you probably already know AT's incredible guides, the microwave line control system, which, if I remember correctly, is the most awarded technology in fishing tackle history, with a total of 6 worldwide Best of Show Innovation Awards. And I know we're going to be talking about that today. And so to introduce us to this great company and to give us some insight about rod components, we have got Kevin Landers here today. And as I said, Kevin's the marketing manager here at AT, and he's just given me a tour of this fantastic facility here in Oviedo. Kevin, thanks so much for being on the Rodcast.
Sid, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Oh, gladly. Been wanting to do this for a while. It's such a great new facility. You guys been here for what, like 2 years now?
Yeah, it's been almost 2 years now, and the facility was purposely built for what we wanted to do. So we have dedicated facilities for R&D and product development. We have stuff that's in our warehouse area. You know, we're sitting in here in our studio, so we have the ability to produce that as well. Sales floors, all the whole thing.
Excellent. So before we get into the AT stuff, usually on the show I want to give my listeners a bit of a background and get some origin stuff. So you and I just actually been talking about this a little bit, but tell us about how not only you got into fishing, but how you got into the industry and made this part of your career.
So my backstory is going to be very different than probably most of your guests. It's funny because I was not the one that grew up on a fishing boat. I didn't grow up fishing. I mean, I did fishing when I was a kid, but it was very like recreational. Once every couple of months, we'd go fishing. But when I got out of high school, I went to college and played football at a college at FAU, and then did a year in school and realized that wasn't for me, and I joined the military for 8 years. Then I got medically retired. Outside of that, I kind of got into the firearms industry with being an instructor and then working in the photography, videography, and media side. And then it was just understanding that there was a different style of marketing that was happening that I wasn't really able to learn in school, so a lot of it was hands-on. And then I was basically in the firearms industry for years. Worked with a lot of amazing companies and had a really good time there. And then my wife decided to go to pharmacy school after we had our kids and everything. So took a year off and did some stuff from home during COVID and everything else. And then saw an opportunity here about a year ago, actually. And I was like, well, this seems like a cool new challenge. And then kind of walked in here and had a 4.5-hour interview for the job. And after that, it was, smooth sailing from there. So it's been an interesting journey, but I have to say the last year has been one of the fastest and most condensed courses on how to learn fishing and everything from components to what fish to catch, how to catch them, baits, the whole nine. And you've talked to a couple of guys that have worked here, and you've seen that some of these guys have phenomenal knowledges in different aspects, whether it's inshore, bass, offshore, rod building. So I've been lucky enough to be surrounded by some amazing people. But yeah, that's kind of the background.
That's an interesting background, particularly given what we've seen in this industry in the last 2 years, particularly during the COVID years and right after the COVID time, with the increase in numbers of new anglers we see, and that sort of gives you that perspective of what does a new angler really want.
We have those conversations all the time. I'm always looked at as the new angler when we have these conversations, because we have guys here that have been fishing for 40 plus years, and we've had young fishermen, but they've been fishing since they were 6 years old. They're 36 now, and one of our sales reps, Alex Funky, is one of our bass guys, is fishing the bass tournaments here locally in Florida and does very well for himself. But he can literally figure out by what the wind feels like of where the fish are at, and I'm over here going, what bait do I tie on? And it's interesting because I have the perspective of the new angler, and we also have the perspective of the intermediates and the long term. So we get together, especially when we're doing product development and we're looking at a new guide system or maybe a new blank. And we have the ability to look at it from a beginner standpoint. Well, how would I understand this? To an intermediate standpoint, to an expert standpoint. So we have a great range of knowledge, and then these guys keep me schooled up all the time. If I make a mistake, they will be the first one to tell me I messed up. Here's what you should be doing. Here's what you should be thinking, and it's a great environment.
That's great. So tell us about American Tackle, because as you and I have talked about. Yeah, right. I'm going to sit back for the next couple of hours and let you just go.
It is a story for sure.
But I mean, one of the things you and I were just talking about is that American Tackle is one of those companies that's providing equipment to the companies that you know. And so it's sort of the background company. So tell us about AT and what goes on here.
So American Tackle started about 38 years ago. And was designed to be a component manufacturer. You'll hear a lot of that term of components. When most anglers out there will notice when they go buy a rod, there's the guides on their rods, their reel seats, the grips, the blank, the thread, the epoxy that holds it in place, the decals that are on their rods. American Tackle provides those products. One thing that we've kind of loved to throw the term around is we're the brand behind the brands. A lot of these companies that you go in to a Bass Pro or an Academy or any one of these number of stores and you go pick up one of those rods, more than likely you're using one of our components, whether that's the cork grip that's on that spinning rod or the microwave guides that are on that casting rod. And so we've developed that kind of processing, but we're seeing more people that are interested in the components themselves, and they're educating themselves on, well, do I want ceramic guides? Do I want no guides? Do I want a stainless press-in guide? Do I want cork versus EVA? So one of the nice things is we get a lot more people paying attention to that sort of thing. So it's developing us to go from behind the scenes to where we've produced more anglers products, which we talked about. We're probably going to talk about more. But also new rod builders, especially like with COVID. It was one of those things that everybody was stuck at home. And anglers get bored really fast. And some guys want to pick up and they can't find their fishing rod because suppliers were shut down. You couldn't get to the store. So they went ahead and built their own rods. So we've always been that kind of background company. We work with some of the biggest brands in the industry. We've had relationships from 20, 30 years going on now, and we've seen an evolution in the industry, and mostly it's not how the rod is made, it's more about the materials the rods are made with. I mean, we're talking Toray carbon fiber, we're talking about titanium, we're talking, fully laid, hand polished carbon fiber reel seats that are light as a feather but as sensitive as, your own fingertip. So it's definitely been an interesting journey. I mean, I've only been here for a year, but Darren, our vice president, has been in the industry for 40 plus years. So it's interesting to get perspective on how the industry is changing. And I think COVID was a big proponent of that, which I think was in a good way, as far as more and more people got interested in rod building. And we were looking at the International Rod Building Challenge and some of the intricacies of some rod builders. But then you have a guy that just wants to go build a really cool flipping stick, and he's like, I just want to go build it with black thread and throw the epoxy on it and have a great time. So it's pretty cool.
So I want to come back to that international competition in a minute, but before we get there, you talk about those COVID years. It seems to me, if I've been paying attention to the industry, that one of the things that went on during the COVID years was a lot of places had difficulty with manufacturing. A lot of places couldn't get product, couldn't turn their equipment out. But you all managed to keep putting stuff out there at a pretty regular pace.
We were lucky enough. Actually, I wouldn't even say it's lucky. We have a great staff here, and they kind of noticed that it was coming. Even back before it really affected the United States, we were looking all over the world, and we're seeing this big, huge spread, and things were shutting. They were shutting whole countries down. So there was a big proactive step to make sure that we could get components in the door. We could get components out to our manufacturers, and we set it up to where no matter what happened, we were flexible enough that we could continue to make the products that we needed to. And we've always said that we have pretty much the fastest lead times out of everybody, especially in the component area. And then it became even more so during COVID. We had a lot of product that was in the warehouse, and then it would straight go out of the warehouse into different brands. And I can't really say which brands we work with because there's that whole confidentiality thing. Sure. But you'll notice, you'll see an AT somewhere stamped on a guide or on a reel seat. And we had a lot of support from our from the manufacturers of these rods, and it was one of those nice things that we stayed ahead. And because of that, our name got moved around a lot more. Our market, we took up a lot more of the market share and kind of pushed even further into innovation because it allowed us to do so. I mean, last year was probably the most successful year that we've ever had at American Tackle, and it's only getting better. This year has been amazing. Even though there's a little bit of there's the inflation issues, and I think everybody worldwide is kind of facing it, but it's still been a very good year for us, for sure.
Does part of that come from the fact, I know right out front you've got those 3 different clocks from 3 different parts of the world, because you've got your feet down in other parts of the world, that manufacturing isn't just happening in one place, so if things get tough in that one place, then you just kind of freeze, but you guys are all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, we noted, it was understood a long time ago that if you planted your flag in one spot and something was to happen, you wouldn't be able to flex fast enough, and the company would suffer and the industry would suffer. People don't realize how much reliance a lot of these large companies have on component manufacturers, because without us, there's no innovation in a guide. There's no new reel seat. There's no new grip. So we have to be on top of our game. So we stay flexible. We're not a super big company. I think we have worldwide right at about 50 employees. So we're not this mega huge company, but part of that is we remain really flexible. The other day we were talking about doing some filming, and one of our sales guys had to be able to drive the boat so we could film correctly, right? But and so, I'll pick up a phone call for it. It allows us, because we're a smaller company, we can flex quicker. So it gives us the ability to manufacture when we need to, plus up our sales setups or pull it back a little bit, so we can kind of feel the ebbs and flows of the fishing industry, because it really is worldwide. We have rod builders in South Africa. We have manufacturers in rod builders as far as like a OEM kind of standpoint in Europe. We do a lot in the carp market over in Europe, which is massive. And it's funny to me when you talk to an American angler, and they're like, what do you mean? You actually fish for carp, and you show them a carp video, and they lose their minds because it's completely different. Fishing in China, fishing in Australia, it's very different. Japan. So we have these places internationally. So if there's an issue in the United States, we can kind of flex and still rely on the rest of our business outside the country, or manufacturing issues or anything like that. So it's nice to be flexible, for sure.
So let's talk about some of the stuff that AT does about the components, and let's start since you and I both. I know
how long you got, because we could go days. On
well,
some
we were just in the warehouse, and I was thinking we can't talk about all of these components over here. But you mentioned it, and I mentioned it, and it's certainly one of the jewels in the AT crown, and that's the microwave guide system.
Yes.
So let's talk about the microwave guide system, because it is a different approach to guides, particularly for spinning rods.
Yeah, it was brought to us years and years and years ago, and we took years to develop it from what the original thought process was, which was, how do we make a guide take all the turbulence off a spinning rod, or even from a casting rod where it's zipping back and forth and it's banging around on that guide? Is how can we make it more efficient? How a lot of it is, how do anglers cover more water? Can we cast further? Can we make it more accurate? How do we make a fisherman's life a little bit better? And so the microwave was born, microwave line control system. And, it's definitely a different looking guide. Every time I've talked to someone that has never seen it before, they go, wow, that's really different looking. And then we show them a video or we have them cast the rod, and it's night and day different. It captures a lot of the turbulence coming off a spinning reel or casting reel. It does work for both. It takes it from that first stripping guide and immediately straightens the rest of the line out. So it's less friction through the air. You're not bouncing on your guides around. It takes all of that extra energy and focuses it out the rod. So we've done some testing, we've done some measurements, and it can be anywhere between 20 to 30% longer distance in casting with less effort, because you're not trying to just absolutely rip this thing to get it out there. It's a much more of a smooth cast, and you will go further. So we've seen the spinning guys set up, bass guys inshore, our guys that are casting from the beach, huge loves of the microwaves. That's why we developed the Microwave 50, so a 50 size guide, and you can surf cast this thing way past breakers and that sort of stuff. So it's definitely one of the coolest things I think the industry has seen, even though it's a little bit different.
It's an interesting looking guide too, because when you first look at it, it looks like a guide inside of a guide.
Yep.
And logically, when you first see it, it looks like, rather than that traditional notion of tapering the movement from a big guide to a smaller guide, that it's almost instantly brought into an inline kind of path.
Yeah, and it's done. It was one of those things. A lot of people will talk about it's a funneling effect, right? You're taking a wider spread of the line and condensing it down to where it's straight the rest of the way. And funneling is a great way to think, but the measurement matters, right? Each guide size, because we have everything from your small casting size microwaves all the way up to the Microwave 50, which is a whole 50 size guide. The measurements are very specific and how they're laid out. And if you are a rod builder and you're interested in the microwaves, we have layout guides. So it tells you how to lay the rod out to get you the most performance. But the cool thing about rod building is you can kind of tweak that and change that. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. I remember when I first came on, and it was like, this is our guide. This is what we're known for. We've won 6 industry awards. We won the Triple Crown, which is I think it was 2013. We won China Fish, iCast, and FTEX all in the same year for the same product. It's never been done before. And we've won now 11 total awards for the company. So it's definitely one of those really cool guides, and every time somebody casts it, it's instantaneous. Holy cow, where has this been? But it's definitely a different look.
Yeah, I want to make clear too, just so that our listeners understand, this isn't just a guide for custom builders. You guys contract to a lot of very recognizable rod distributors, and it's being built into manufactured rods as well now too.
Yeah, it's a program we have called the Wave Army program. This was started back when the microwaves first came out, and these are manufacturers. I mean, it's Lew's, Fitzgerald Fishing, Cast King, Stealth Sticks, Reaper Rods. There's 20, 30, 40 different companies that use the microwave guides on their rods, and to be a part of the Wave Army, you have to have a line of rods with a microwave guide system. And we continue to we just signed actually yak rods for kayak fishermen. Probably one of the, in my opinion, probably one of the better kayak built rods. Only uses microwaves, because you're on a kayak, you don't have the leverage when you're, you don't have the leverage when you're sitting down in a kayak, but you still need to be able to reach further, because you may not be able to get your kayak in that spot. So microwaves are really taking off in the kayak space for sure.
So what influence of yours, given your background, why is it Why is it the Wave Army and not the Wave Navy? I mean, are you going
to? It was I did not come up with the name.
I figure you're the Army guy. So
I was the Army guy, but I inherited the name from past. It's been a program that's been around since probably about 2013, 2014, and it's one of those really cool programs because we see guys at ICAST. And one of those things is we bump into like the guys at Casking or Fitzgerald Fishing or any of those guys lose, and it's like, oh, hey, what's up? And it's Wave Army. We take pictures. We have the best microwave Army rod at ICAST. We give an award there for that. So it's really just a cool thing to see the industry adopt something that, even though it is different, and the fishing industry is probably one of the most consistent industries when it's like, this is what I like and I don't want to move from it until something big happens. And when it does, you see a lot more adoption of it. And it's becoming much more adopted. We're getting companies, year after year, and it's a really cool thing.
So let's talk a little bit more about guides. Most of the guides, when we were just in the warehouse, I was kind of mind blown just at the sheer numbers of guides. If you're a guide fanatic and you just really like guides,
man.
This is drool heaven here. But most of your guides are of a very similar kind of design. They're not the microwave, but the standard spinning reel, wire mount kind of guides. But you do this one guide that you have that's the HD Turbo Boat Guide, which is tell me a little bit about that one.
So the Boat Guide is a redesign of a very old school guide. Boat guides have been around for a long time. They're big, heavy duty, chunky guides. Those guides were basically reimagined and redesigned a couple years ago to be a little bit smaller, a little bit thinner, snagless, the whole nine, with better materials in them. So you can definitely it's a big heavy duty guide. It's a big heavy lifting guide if you want to go that route. We have a huge amounts of different guide frames. We can get into in the Boat Guide. A lot of people still use them. It's definitely an old school looking guide. We have newer style stuff with our Virtus series stuff, with the new XHDs, the heavy duty XHDs, the ULs, the high frames, all in titanium. It's one of those things is guides are designed for multiple different uses, but we still see rod builders that'll change up in how they build them. I know a bass guy that runs a boat guide, builds a couple of boat guides and some of his flipping rods because he wants to put a huge amount of pressure on this guide. So it's definitely a cool guide for sure.
All right, so when I asked you that question, you gave me that look of, you got it wrong, Sid. So let's come back to the fact that I said that a lot of the guides in there look like they're the same kind of approaches, but you gave me that, hell no, they're not.
So it's and even though you are a very you're a high. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that.
Get the compliment right here, man.
You got a lot of knowledge when it comes to fishing. The thing that we're starting to notice even more is people don't have the full understanding on how a guide frame is supposed to be designed, or how a ring and the material of a ring. A lot of people think the rings are metal. They're not. They're ceramic.
Ceramic. Yep.
Right. But they're different levels of ceramics. So you can get a low-grade ceramic and it could crack on you and fall apart, or you could get an extremely high-grade ceramic and it will last you for 20, 30, 40 years. The frame design, the legs, right? You have double-footed guides, you have single-footed guides, you have quad frame guides, you have stuff where, depending on which way the legs are shaped, it flexes in different ways. If you get into materials, it's titanium, it's stainless, it's all these different materials. Titanium is much more flexible, but it's also lighter. You get into certain types of stainless, 316s, and then it's how do you coat the stainless? So you said they're all very similar, but I think you realize they're not anymore.
Right, absolutely. But also in giving that answer, I'm now doubting that you've only been in the industry for as short as you claim, because that's a pretty insightful answer. So
I have probably the greatest group of teachers, rod builders, anglers that I think anybody in the industry has. And it's one of those things. It could be something as simple as, actually, case in point, Doug, who is our photographer, videographer, graphic designer, really into bow fishing, but does some really cool fishing from some shore stuff, some smaller fishing stuff from banks, and then all the way up to Funky, who is our bass tournament guy, who's got 40 rods in his boat and all the electronics and everything. So it's nice to be surrounded by people that are like-minded in that they enjoy fishing, but also so diverse that if I have an inshore question, I can go talk to Austin. If I have a rod building question, I can go to Don. If I have a offshore question, I can go to Captain Mo, who's a registered captain with the Coast Guard. If it's a bass question, instantly go to Funky. If I want to have an idea about some old school fishing techniques, I can go to Darren, who's our VP. So having the diversity of knowledge that we have in this building, I think it's accelerated my knowledge, and it's helped me understand the nuanced thing that a lot of people don't understand, but then to be able to turn it around. And my job is basically to turn around the crazy, specific, nuanced stuff and then make it more understandable for rod builders, anglers, just anybody who's kind of interested in it.
So let's pick up on that, because you're talking about having insider information within a company in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I have talked about how the general angler is also now more demanding of knowledge sets, of wanting to know how things
Oh, absolutely.
work. That it's not just go into the big box store, grab a rod because it looks pretty and go get on the water, that there's a lot of angler knowledge. And we talked specifically about the ways in which the digital age has sort of facilitated that desire to know more. So how does it change the angler?
It's access to information, right? It used to be if you showed up at a lake somewhere, you had to know the guy. There was always the guy on the lake, right? You found the guy that was sitting in the corner smoking a cigar, and you're like, oh yeah, use this bait and this rod and go cast in that corner and you'll catch bass for days. But it was never as much as it is now. I mean, we can turn on a YouTube video and find our favorite angler who's given us the technique of, he used this rod with this weight and this bait and this time of year on this lake, right? I can find out that information there. Then it gets into, talking about different baits, different colors. Why does it matter? Then it gets into behavior of fish. If the wind's blowing in this direction and it's this moon phase, you can kind of guess where the fish are going to be. And then it's electronics, it's technique specific. I mean, the breadth of knowledge that's available through social media, YouTube, Google, forums, companies that are giving out this information now, it really does, and it has developed anglers to be much more knowledgeable. They're learning techniques faster than they ever have. When we start talking about technique specific, whether that's flipping versus punching, it could be how to work a jerk bait, right? There's 30 different ways to work a jerk bait, but only 2 work in Georgia, and these 4 other ones work in Florida. But you have the ability to get there. And then like our phones, right? We were talking about this a little while ago, which is there's apps that tell me where the fish are, and it tells me what lure they caught it with, at what season and what time of year, and I can go to that spot and hopefully try to catch that same fish. So the amount of information available to anglers is absolutely massive, and I think it's in a good way for the industry for sure, but it demands more out of companies now, because you can't just get away with putting a fresh coat of paint on a rod, because those anglers are going to see that and go, no, that's not a new rod, right? So it's kept us on our toes for sure. We're always looking at how do we innovate, how do we do something new, how do we change something, but we're also starting a lot more with, we have a new series on YouTube called This is Rod Building. It's filmed by Gary Binney, who is our European branch manager, and it's filmed overseas in Sweden, and he talks about rod building, but it's not like a rod builder sitting at a bench tying a guide on. It gets into why is he building it a certain way. Here's some cool tips on how to build this way. And even from an angler standpoint, if you go watch those videos, you'll understand a little bit more on why components matter. When you walk into a Bass Pro or an Academy, or you order your rods online, why would you pick EVA over cork? Do you want a triggered reel seat? Do you want a not triggered reel seat? Do you want to, what kind of spinning seat do you want? Do you want a split grip? Like there's so much we could get into, and to make it easy, there's 30,000 SKUs in that warehouse. So you were looking at it from that standpoint. I know the number is, and you're talking about 30,000 products that can go into a permutation on a rod, and you're looking at millions of different ways to put a rod together. And it's all dependent on how you want to design that rod.
I wonder how much that also changes the overall narrative of how we learn fishing, right? Because prior to all of this information, you learned from
took
dad
me on the boat.
or,
Yep.
or grandpa or somebody, and now it's, I learned how to fish from this guy on YouTube who I've never met before. And
well, I mean, look at just in general the DIY world, right? Where I have buddies that were trying to figure out how to build a desk, and they went online, figured out a DIY IKEA hack, bought a drill and a screwdriver, and made their own custom desk. Or how to build a computer. If you want to build your own computer, you can go online and figure out how to build a computer. You can go online right now and figure out how to build a fishing rod, or how to make lures. I know there's a lot of guys that are doing DIY molded lures. I forgot who it was, but they were at ICAST. They did really well. But it's you have a lot more people that are interested in how to make things. And I think a lot of that comes with, my generation and even your generation, which was we're interested in that whole how does it work? How can I make it? How can I make it mine? How can I customize it, right? So you're seeing a lot more of that where the information is there. It's just a matter of, do you want to do that? Are you interested in that? Like, I saw a video the other day about a guy doing a tie-dye t-shirt, and I was freaking out because the guy spent 3 hours tying it together and coloring it a certain way, and it's phenomenal the amount of knowledge that we have access to. And the fishing industry being as diverse as it is, I mean, I could go online and watch a really cool video on how to go fishing for shark in the Keys, but then I can literally hit the next video and it's ice fishing in Canada. 20 years ago, you didn't know that. You didn't have that access. You had the lake that you were on. You had your dad, your granddad, whoever that could teach you how to fish, but it was never at the level that we're teaching kids now. Like you've got the high school fishing tournament series. You got college Bassmaster. I mean, you have kids that are 12, 13, 14, 15 years old that are fishing at an extremely high level because their access to information is so much easier to get a hold of.
I wonder too, because of that information, if we're also not changing, and I'm not trying to put a value system on this in any way, but there's a different kind of intimacy too, right? It becomes from a family affair to I really understand my equipment affair. It drives up the notion of what being a knowledgeable angler is. It's not just that Grandpa told me how to use this crawdad or whatever.
Yep.
It's that I've got these microwave guides that are putting out this much line per second, and I know what I'm doing here. It's a much more technical kind of knowledge.
Oh
too.
yeah, I mean, you can really bury yourself in the weeds when it comes to the rabbit hole you chase to learn more about like rod components in general, or just even like reels. I did not understand the intricacy of some of these reels in this industry, whether it's the offshore spinning reel to an offshore casting reel to conventional style stuff, but like the mechanics and the engineering and the importance of these types of things is absolutely insane. And rod components, it's no different. I mean, I luckily get to do this every single day, so I have firsthand knowledge from a lot of these guys. But there's been plenty of times that I've hopped online to go see another rod builder's idea on here's how you do a dragon scale wrap, and then it was here's the proper way to do it and here's the easy way to do it. So there's different ways to do the same technique. So it's definitely been eye-opening for sure. But yeah, I think it's changed our industry quite a bit. I think it's developing more and more anglers that are investing in the recreation angling side, to where you see guys that are young, then maybe their dad didn't take them fishing, right? Maybe it was a circumstances they just couldn't, right? And now they're in that point in their life where they can and they're interested in it, and so they go and try it. And I think we saw a lot of that with during COVID, where people had time on their hands, and you don't have to go fishing with a bunch of people. You can go fishing by yourself. So guys would go buy a fishing rod and they get shipped to their door, or they go build a fishing rod and walk outside and go throw a line in the water. And we're in Florida, so literally there's little ponds everywhere that's got bass in it. So you can throw it out there and bang, there's a bass. So I think more and more people are seeing it as you can just go fishing and have fun, and there's so much information on it. You're not going to be unsuccessful. It's not like when we were kids where if you didn't know, you were just hoping and praying. It was a lot more luck back then. I think now with the technology that we have, the materials that we have, and how things are being designed, you have a much better opportunity to definitely go catch a fish on your first try, for sure.
Yeah, it also resets the expectations too, right? That,
yeah.
The idea that I bought the right rod, I bought the right lure, I went to the right spot that everybody told me to, I damn well better catch a fish. Right?
Where's my 10-pound
right,
bass?
exactly.
My guy told me there's a 10-pounder here.
Right. Yep. So I know it's kind of a big question.
We've had a couple of those so far. We're trying to keep it under 6 hours.
Well, I want because of my listeners, I always try to look for some pragmatic advice too. So, given that we were talking about the microwave guides and talking about guides in general, what does one look for when they go to buy an off-the-rack rod in terms of guides, because let's face it,
Oh boy.
it's that standard thing, right? Every time you go into, any one of these big box stores like you mentioned, there's always the guy who takes the rod down off the rack and he looks down it like he's sighting in a rifle.
Yeah.
And and somehow it's tantamount to kicking the tire on a used car and deciding whether to buy it or not.
100%, and a lot of you'll see a lot of guys that flex it on the ground
Right.
because they want to figure out what the action and what the backbone feels
Right.
like, and you can understand how that says with a lot of it on how that blank is marked on what's the line rating, what's the power rating, what's the action, is it fast, is it slow? You can kind of get that just from that, and you'll get the I like the tire kicker idea because it's exactly what it is. They're kicking
Right.
the tires. They're going to go, is this the good rod for Rodney?
And it's usually for the people around them, so it looks like they know what they're doing rather than actually determining something about the rod.
Oh
right?
yeah, well this thing's made of Toray 24 ton, and it's
Train spotters in every industry, no matter what.
100%.
Yeah,
And it's interesting to me because it all comes down to what you're going to use it for. I had this awesome conversation with Don, who's one of our sales guys, who's probably forgotten more about rod building than I could ever learn. He's commonly referred to as the bearded Yoda, and he's a phenomenal human being, and he's been a rod designer for years for some of the biggest companies. He's a builder. Anyway, sorry, Don's amazing. Well, when I first started here, I was like, I just want like an all-around rod. You never say that to a rod builder. You just don't. It's one of those things that there's no such thing as an all-around rod.
That's like every time somebody who doesn't fish comes over to my house and they look in the garage and say, "Why do you have 100+ fishing rods?" And I say, "Because there's 100+ different ways I fish."
Or there's 100 different lures you have tied onto
Right,
it, and they're
absolutely.
balanced perfectly for that one thing. But yeah, I remember having the conversation about an all-around rod, and he's like, "There's no such thing."
Right.
You have to identify, what are you going to go fishing for? What kind of lure do you think about throwing? And that's why I think this industry is so interesting, because it's all encompassing. You have to know, are you going to go fish for bass? Great. What kind of lure are you going to throw? What kind of weights are you going to throw? And that turns into, well, this is the type of rod. If it's going to throw, a 3/4 ounce, then you want to make sure that the rod is set for a 3/4 ounce setup so it compresses correctly and it loads up correctly. So when you cast it, you get the power you need to cast, but you're not just whipping it off. There's balance involved in it. But when it comes to guides, it kind of depends. And again, this is one of those answers. If you're looking for a higher end rod, you want to make sure that you look at the rings and make sure that ceramic, if it is ceramic inside of there, you want to check that ceramic for any chipping. If it's chipped,
tiny little chip using mono will
it's
destroy
gone.
you.
Fluoro is one of the best sounds, though, when it rips through a bad guide. It sounds like a flock of seagulls
But it
going
also
through
makes
it.
that weird bird's nest.
Oh,
like
yeah.
strand of mono coming off. Yeah.
It's a good spaghetti right there.
Yep.
But it's if you're doing more of a lower cost rod, it may not have rings, and that's okay. Don't think that you see the metal but you don't see an internal ring. That's okay. We have air, we're commonly referred to our airs. So our microwave airs, our tie forged airs have no rings in them. They have pressed stainless steel in them. So it still works. It works just fine. It's not abrasive to your line. It just doesn't have that ring, so you do have a little bit of friction. But that also brings that cost point down for an angler to go buy a $100 reel setup. So, the guys that are sighting down that rifle are looking for guide straightness. Most of the time when you're getting into a manufactured rod, it's going to be fine. If you're getting a high-end rod, check that ceramic, make sure there's no chipping in it. But also look for something that's snagless. And of course, because I'm the marketing manager of American Tackle, you want to look for the American Tackle hang tag and the AT stamped on the side. No, it's a really cool industry. We're friends with a lot of guys that that are at different companies in the components industry, because it is such a small group of business companies that actually do the components. So we all know each other.
Yeah, and we could easily right now ask that same question and get into the weeds on reel seats, on butts, on handles, on all of it.
When you have
and blanks, we would be here for days.
Oh
so.
gosh, blanks. I'm still learning blanks. You saw when you walked in that we have racks and racks of blanks, and every single one is different, and it can be one thing like our LS76s and that was designed to be a light saltwater rod. But it's one of the best flipping punching rods blanks on the planet. Super great backbone, really fast, really sensitive on the tip. So you can punch it through lilies, immediately get eaten, and rip that bass out of those lilies. But it also works on snook. It works out great on reds. So we have our heavy lifting blanks that are big trolling rods, our E-class rods, and carbon fiber rods, and we have fly rods that are carbon fiber in a 4-piece, 6-piece. So it can go, you can go down as far as the rabbit holes you want to. But for a lot of people, if you pick up a rod and it's comfortable and you like it, if you know that you want cork, find a cork handled rod. If you know you want a casting rod that has a trigger, find that. If it's comfortable in your hand and you feel comfortable holding it, it's got a decent balance to it, you're pretty solid. And if you have questions about components or anything like that, hop online. And again, it's access to information, right? We have a YouTube channel, an Instagram, a Facebook. You can reach out to us on email or even send us a message on Instagram. I run a lot of the social media. So if you have a question about a potential product that you're looking at or a rod, or you're thinking about, well, I kind of want to do this, well, this is what you want to look for. So yeah, we can go down that rabbit hole, but I don't think we have 3 days to record this.
Well, and also, I mean, one of the other things that's sort of subtext in there too is it's not just about the technical aspects of the components anymore too. There's also an aesthetic principle too, right? We want our gear to
it's got to look good.
Got to look good.
Got to look good.
And you guys have done, I mean, the piece that comes to mind when I think of American Tackle are your fly fishing reel seats, those windowed seats.
The braided windows.
Braided windows are just gorgeous reel seats. I want to build a fly rod just to be able to put those reel seats in.
Oh, that would be so easy to do, Sid. I'll just bring you down here and put you on the rod building machine we got out there and let you just go to town.
Oh, that'd be. You got all that split bamboo out there for a real rod.
Man, no, we're doing matrix fly blanks with some carbon fiber. But no, it's one of those. It's nice to have that sort of stuff because there is definitely an aesthetic to it. Like, it used to be everything looked the same, right? And there wasn't really how you paint a rod. It wasn't carbon fiber grips. It was all cork grips. It was the simple graphite reel seats. It was a split grip design, and it was just a blacked, fiberglass rod. Now we're getting into, we were the first ones to really push carbon fiber in the component space. We had our carbon fiber G2 grips, which are, you can do a full length, you can do adjustable length, you can do a split grip, but it has a really nice carbon fiber weave. We have our CCT stuff, which is our compressed carbon technology, which is a mix of carbon and graphite, but it's done in such a way that it's extremely light, extremely durable, and extremely strong. But you can see these really cool flecks all through the reel seat. But then you can do a standard graphite. So you can mix and match stuff. We debuted something called our Shiroi collection, which is our white collection at ICAST this year, and that was a huge hit because it's designed to be mixed and matched. So you can do the black, the white, the silver. You could do black and gold. You could do all these different things. You could have specks of white in certain things, and then like you saw at the international side, like color of thread. It still blows my mind. I remember when I first walked in the door the first day I was here, and Don was sitting on the rod bench, and he was tying a guide on. I had no idea guides were tied on with thread, and it's a specific type of thread. It's designed for making fishing rods, but I had no idea that's how it was done. And then you get into that rabbit hole and how you can cross-wrap things and weave names into people's rods and customize these and do some of the most intricate artwork I've ever seen on the planet. And so you can get as aesthetic as you want, or you can be really basic and just do black and silver, or black on black with black thread, black guides. So it just, personally, I like the aesthetics. I like the touches. I've built a couple more rods myself, and I've done a lot of Star Wars-y stuff because I'm kind of a nerd in that way. So I have my lightsaber set. So I literally had the blanks painted to be the red, the green, and the blue. And then I did a dragon scale in silver, so it looked like the pommel of a lightsaber. I'm nerding out.
Got kyber crystals built into the handles.
Actually, I have it on the butt section. I put it in the very bottom of the butt, so the kyber crystals on the bottom. Yeah, I'm nerding out a little bit right now, but
I'll go Star Wars with you all day long. So
some of the new stuff that's coming out because I'm a nerd for movies and TV shows, and man, some of the stuff they're coming out now is just so much fun.
It is. I have to say, some of it annoys me too because we're getting backstory on characters I never needed backstory for.
But you never read the book, the offshoot books and stuff.
Even so, I did not need to know that the Rancor would actually make a good pet. I needed him to remain a vicious killer.
But the story arc of the Rancor with if you haven't seen the show, we're not going to no spoilers. It's only been like 3 years, guys. Get to timing, but it comes back to even like that, like the aesthetics of the rod, right? Is we look at aesthetics on boats. Guys get their boats wrapped. They get
Well,
them
and isn't-
painted, like all of this different things, and it just goes down from there. Like the Shimano SLX rod with the reel with the bright blue
Right.
spool, or some of the Strellas, and so aesthetics I think is becoming more and more prevalent. You have rod companies that are very specific on the colors they use, and they're very tried and true to those colors. And then you have other companies that are more traditional, but you start to see them breaking into doing a little bit more color.
Like when the Carrot Stick came out and things like that.
Exactly.
But then also, let's face it too, a lot of the DIY custom rod building really began with those offshore guides wanting custom sets of rods to match up on their boat to create that image
Oh,
of
yeah.
I've got the best gear. I had these special built for the kind of fishing I want to do, and that aesthetic plays a lot into that. It's got to match the boat. And
Our Darren built Darren, who the VP here is, he's got an offshore center console set up, and his rods match his boat.
Oh, yeah.
Like the color is the same. He's got accent colors in it.
Yep.
It says his boat's name on the rod. Like there's definitely a really cool personalization, where you can personalize these things to be gifts for people. You can do it to where it'll match your boat. It'll match your aesthetic. Like I'm a military guy. I've built an infantry rod. It's infantry blue. I've got the cross rifles in the butt section. I've got some cool little things that I've done with it. But that's for me, right? But even from a manufacturer standpoint, like when you're getting into a guy that was rod building for himself and now has made a production rod company out of it, they still have touches of themselves in those rods, and they see what people want. Like I had a conversation with a gentleman who is going to be building more rods, and he was talking about building rods for women. And I remember the first thing is I'm not doing pink, because it's one of those
Right,
like
it's
really
cliche,
it's huge,
yeah.
it's massively cliche. But you know what the number one color for women is? Blues and greens. And he started doing these blues and greens, and these rods are gorgeous. And they are just like I bought one from him, and I was like, I want that rod, whether it's for women or not. Like the aesthetic of the rod, there is something, not only just the layout of the guides and what grip section or what reel seat, but like how does it look? Because like I want to be able to walk out and go, I'm out by myself. Like I want to have something that has a memory to it or looks really good. And especially with the age of Instagram, right? Like we want our rods to look pretty.
Right.
When we post a picture holding up the 8-pound bass, holding the rod next to it, we
Don't
want the
that-
rod to
don't want
look
that duct
real.
tape reel seat and, Grandpa's rod
switch
on
out the
there.
rods really
That's
quick.
right.
I caught it on this rod, but I
Yep.
really want to take a picture of this rod. But I think Instagram and social media in general has made us even more aware of the aesthetic stuff, for sure.
So AT needs to turn out the Instagram rod filter so that you can get your rod to look like whatever you want.
Oh,
when you
that'd
put
be
it on there.
funny. Like a makeup filter
Right,
just
right,
for
exactly.
rods.
Makeup
Oh,
rod for filter.
done,
Right, yeah.
done.
So-
Doug, get on it. Doug, get to the filter, man. You got. Okay, cool.
So we've been going for a while, and rather than we could, like you said, we could get down rabbit holes on all these components. But there are a couple other things about AT I want to ask you about to sort of lead us into conclusion here. One of which you mentioned already, and I was unaware of it until I walked in here, and that's that international rod building competition.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. Tell us about that.
So the International Rod Building Challenge, was something that's been going on for a couple of years. We took it over a couple of years ago, but it is the best rod builders in the entire world, and it's a very simple premise, and it's designed specifically for those hardcore rod builders, which is we have a blank. We get a blank in. It's not one that we sell. It's not anything we would ever sell, but it is designed to be unknown. We don't know the specs of it. We don't know what it's supposed to be for. We don't know what action it is, and we sell that blank for $75 and $75 shipped in the U.S., and it's $125 shipped internationally. So that's your only entry cost. That's it. And you buy the blank. You can buy 2 blanks. You can buy 3 blanks. You can buy 4 blanks, but you only can submit 1 rod. So once you get that blank, a true rod builder should be able to figure out what that rod is going to be used for, what they want to use that rod for. It doesn't mean that it was designed that way, but it gives them a starting point. Then they start building the rod. And at the level that we're at now, the only thing that I think you would be is like store-bought is the guide. The grips are all handmade. The reel seats in some ways can be handmade. All of the thread work is massively intricate, and there have been rods that have come in extremely simply, and they're very simple rods, but they're immaculately done. The finish is perfect. The color selection is correct. The lineups are perfect. And then you get to a rod that's 250 hours in it. It's fully epoxied. It's all laid out. It's hand painted. Our Arrow reel seat was cut out of aluminum by a gentleman named Mark Krause, who has won the International Rod Building Challenge a couple times. It can go. It's like when people go to SEMA, and like you have like the normal Mustang, and then you have the completely redone from the ground up Mustang, and that's where we get to. It's to show the artistry, to show the craftsmanship, but it's also to be a fishable rod. I mean, it's a really, really cool event. We're actually in the midst of it right now. We still have a couple of months before we bring it to the International Rod Building Convention, ICRBE, which is a really cool event. It's all about rod builders. It's like ICAST for rod builders. So everybody kind of gets together and hangs out. So we do the first round of judging there, and then we bring the top 10 back here, and then we have another round of judging here on the top 10, and then the winner of it becomes the world champion of the International Rod Building Challenge.
What are the criteria for that? I mean, when you judge, is it just the aesthetics, or is there functionality?
We're actually in the middle of kind of re-looking at how we're going to do it, but we're just changing up some of the terms. But it's everything from alignment of guides. Your guides have to be straight. Like
you got our tire kicker in here and then to check them for us.
Exactly. Yeah. So the guides have to be straight. Your reel seat has to fit a reel. Like we've had rods come in here where they do all the decorative work, but we can't even fit a reel in the reel seat, so the functionality's gone. It has to be usable. It can't be 55 pounds because you pumped up a bunch of stuff. It still has to be a usable official rod. Your finish work, how your finish is done, if there's bubbles in it, if you have fuzz in it, how does it look? Is it thick enough? Your thread work, your custom work, where your reel seat is, the layout of the rod, does it lay out correctly? Like when we have the judges come in, we have reels, like in-house reels where there's casting reels or spinning reels. There's everything from a 3,000 to, that big giant conventional 50 that sits over there. So it depends on what the rod is. But we'll put line in it and we'll pull on the rods and we'll see, are the guides laid out correctly? If they're not, it's a deduction. And there also has to be an aesthetic to it. If the aesthetic is very harsh, it kind of can come against it. But every rod can be submitted with a write-up, so it can give the judges an understanding. Last year, a gentleman won with the duck call rod, and it looked like a duck call. But one of the really cool things about that rod was it had the duck feathers from I believe it was his son's first duck, and it had the feathers in the rod. But it was all shaped correctly. Like it looked like if you step back, it looked like a duck call at the end of a fishing rod. But it was all completely functional. It was gorgeous. The finish work was amazing. And it came down. It was really close between first and second. So it's one of those competitions that if you want to see the best that there is, or you want to try yourself against the best that there is, because the gentleman that won it last year had never won it before. And some of the people that we look at in our industry from a rod builder that are titans didn't win. So there's always this creativity to it that allows rod builders to flex their muscle, to really push their own craft. And then we get to see these things, and it's mind-boggling what people can come up to on a fishing rod.
The stuff that's out there, these are museum pieces. These aren't, go put them on the water. This is
the cool thing is you
art.
Can.
Right.
And that's a crazy thing to me is like you look at this and you think about it like these beautiful, amazing. I can go strap a fishing reel to one of those things and let's go fishing in the pond out front. Like you can, and that's the cool thing about it is even though there is this huge amount of artistry, right? There's an aesthetic to it. I can still strap a reel to it. I can still go toss in the pond out front. I can still pull a 3-pound bass out with it.
Right. That to me, it's like taking a Benelli to go kill a water moccasin, right?
There are plenty of guys that run around and grocery shop in Lamborghinis. So,
Yep, you got a point. All right, so one other thing before we wrap this up.
Yeah.
One of the things AT does that I think is absolutely fantastic is that you guys are big sponsors for the University of Central Florida Bass Nights. You've gotten involved in the Collegiate Bass Tour and support there. Talk to me about why AT decided to go that route.
Part of it was a connection to local community. We have actually a couple people here that actually went to UCF, but it was also about mentorship. One of the things that we've noticed with collegiate programs, high school programs, young anglers, is their drive and thirst for knowledge. We were approached by them and had a conversation with them, and these are smart, intelligent young men and women that want to be a part of the fishing industry. And one thing that we do with them specifically is we pull that curtain back, right? When we go to ICAST, we see behind the curtain. We talk to all of the who's who. Like when we went to the summit where we met, we were talking to presidents of massive companies and organizations. When, you sit down and you have lunch with the president of Shimano, like that's, you're in that industry now, and it's such a small industry, but there is kind of that barrier to kind of get into that. So we wanted them to come in and work with them on, one, they're a great R&D for us. If we want to test a new blank or test a new guide, we can go give that to them and let them go fish it, and they will beat up on it because they're young college kids. They're not going to baby it, and they can give us some feedback. At the same time, if they want to get into this industry, we try to show them kind of what's going on with that and how to develop those thought processes. But the UCF guys, the Bass Knights, are absolutely amazing. We love those guys. They're out there. They're constantly doing fundraisers. One of their anglers actually was diagnosed with cancer not too long ago. He had throat cancer, and they still did their season, but all of their donations went to help him get through the year that he needed to take off to do chemo, and now he's back.
Oh, it's
so it's like it's one of those, like, sometimes it's a selfish ask. Like, you have sponsorships, right, where it's, you want to be selfish about it. You want to be like, well, I want to sponsor this guy because he gets millions and millions and millions of views. And then there's times like with UCF is we want to sponsor them because we see young anglers in the world that don't have a direction. They see what they see on YouTube, but they don't have the ability to get into this industry, and we have to constantly be bringing in new blood. We have to bring in new thoughts and really look at it from that standpoint to keep developing our industry more and more and more, and make it, better for everybody, more inclusive, but also give them an outlet for their interest and their hobbies.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And as you know, I've been trying to get more involved with the University of Florida bass team. And one of the interesting conversations I have with those guys is that most of them are business majors.
Yep.
And their intent is to come into the industry. And so they're not living with that fantasy that I think a lot of us live with as teenagers of, I'm going to get a bunch of sponsors and I'm going to go pro and I'm going to, that they see a more realistic version of what being in fishing means. And a lot of it means I'm going to go to college and get a business degree, and I'm going to go into industry. And it's a big industry. We're talking about a $70 billion a year industry. And so I think that kind of outreach to those collegiate programs and also the high school programs is just fantastic. So congrats to AT for doing all of that.
We definitely appreciate that. It was one of those things, it was kind of a no-brainer for us. I mean, you look at like pro anglers out there, and you're right, they're business owners. These guys are balancing multiple different sponsorships. They're having to make appearances for things. They're having to work on selling product. They have to market themselves. Like,
oh, they are a brand in and of themselves.
100%, and they're having to do this all while traveling the country in a truck and a boat strapped to the back of it, and waking up at 3 a.m. to get prepped to do a practice day, and then at the end of their practice day they got to go jet over and do a photo shoot. Like, so, I think because of social media, a lot of these younger anglers are seeing that this isn't just all pretty lights and everything else. It's
actual work.
It's hard work, and we have friends in the industry that are pro anglers, and especially with like our Wave Army guys, you start talking to those guys, and it's mind-blowing as far as what the amount of work they put in. But they're not shy about talking about it. And the more of your high school and college athletes, and they are, and I 100% think that these anglers are athletes. They are up at the crack of dawn. They eat right. They go out there. It's technique specific, and they know, and they're super hard on themselves. But to give them a chance to maybe break into the industry that they love, I think is exactly what we need to be doing. And I think what every company should be looking at is, find your local, high school team or a college team. And it doesn't even have to be something where if you have a ton of money, you can just throw money at them. Like, offer them the opportunity to come talk to you. If you want to have an internship, if you have an internship, maybe offer those guys the internship and get them a little bit more in the industry. If you're a bait shop, like, let them come in and learn from you. Like, I think the more we can tell and more we can talk to young anglers, it just increases our industry in general, and I think it makes it a lot better for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, which is also why, as I told you, since you and I met, I did give your name to my Florida Bass guys also.
So if you're on the UCF, if you're on the UF Bass fishing team, you can thank Sid for sending me that email. But I have seen it. I've just been very busy. We have about 50 different projects running at any time. So
I bet.
I'll get back to you, UF, but also go Knights.
Go Gators. So this has been great, and obviously you and I, and we have found this out over the last couple of weeks. You and I could sit here and talk. Endlessly,
yeah.
But, our listeners' attention span is only going to be but so long.
Very true.
So let's get to our traditional wrap-up question, and I'm actually kind of interested in asking you this because you're new to all of this.
Oh, boy.
So I asked somebody this question. I ask everybody this question, and a lot of the guys who've been fishing for their entire lives, they've got the answers. They know.
Oh yeah.
So here's the question, right? So, what is the Kevin Landers grail fish, the bucket list fish, the fish that you want to catch, and that you want to catch on a rod you built since you're in this business?
Oh no. But see, here's my problem. I haven't caught a ton of different species.
Right. This is why I'm saying it ought to be just a quick little. I'll take anything.
No, I mean, I want to catch. Actually, I tell this story quite a bit when I kind of can get into this. Is I want to go catch a red on a fly rod I built.
That's
I want to go
fantastic.
catch a snook on a spinning rod I built. I want to go to Alaska and I want to go get salmon off a fly rod. I want to go out to California and go tuna fishing, go after some of the bluefin out there, or I'm in the place, and this is where this gets really crazy. Is I would take anything, but there's also things that I want to catch a 200-pound tarpon, right? And we were actually one of the guys that came in here that builds a lot of fly rods and spinning rods. He was telling me about a 200-pound tarpon he caught in the middle of the night, and I was just freaking out because he showed me the video. So yeah, I don't have a ton of experience in this, so it's anything, really, absolutely anything I would be super excited about.
You do realize that the redfish and snook are 30 minutes away from right here, and you could head over to the lagoon, take the rod, and go.
It's funny because we have these conversations all the time because pretty much everybody in here fishes, and they fish on the weekend. They come back and they show these huge pictures, and here I am married with 2 kids, and I'm I don't have a boat yet. I've got a kayak, which I'm really getting used to, but yeah, they show me these beautiful snook. Or giant bull reds, or Darren comes back from an offshore trip that he had, and you see this giant freaking mahi, and you're like, somebody just call me. But it's one of those things is I'm really interested because every single time I go fishing, and I go fishing for a new species, it's that first time again, and I get super excited for that sort of stuff. The other day, we went offshore with Daniel, who's our IT guy. And we went offshore fishing, and we were out there doing amberjacks and some cool stuff, snapper. And all of a sudden, you see this big, giant black shape come whip underneath the boat, and it's a sailfish. And so I'm freaking out, oh my! I've seen these things on TV shows, and then all of a sudden he hooks up to a sailfish, and the thing comes out of the water, and it's nice to be able to have that experience, where it's every time I go out on the water, I don't know what I'm going to catch.
Yeah,
but it's just there's the boyhood wonder at 37 years old that I'm just oh my God, oh my gosh, let's go do this. And so, yeah, I think if anybody is out there and has been an angler and they're a big bass fisherman, go try something new. Go offshore, go inshore, go call a captain and get out there, because I will tell you right now, there's something about hooking into something. It comes up to the top of the water, and it's nothing you've ever caught in your life, and you're just holy crap, I want that now. And it's the coolest feeling. I love this industry. It's just awesome. That's
great. Kevin, I can't thank you enough for this. This has been fantastic. We could probably keep going forever, but
we're gonna have to have you come down here and build a rod. I think we're definitely gonna have to do a how-to podcast of how to build a rod.
The problem with that for me is there are a lot of different kinds of rods I want to build.
Yeah, that's true.
I've got plenty of expensive hobbies already, yeah, but that would be great. So thanks so much for being on the Rodcast, and looking forward to seeing what else is coming out from American Tackle Company.
I appreciate it, and thank you so much. And if any of your listeners have any questions, they can hit us up on our Instagram, our Facebook. Everything is just at American Tackle. Our website is americantackle.us. And if anybody has an email or wants to send me an email, super easy. It's just kevin@americantackle.us.
Okay, everybody on the UF Bass team got that email address, right?
Hey.
Thanks, Kevin.
Absolutely, Sid. Thank you so much.
Okay, my listening and drinking crew, it is time for a bourbon break. And on today's bourbon break, I'm going to turn to a bourbon that I really did not know much about, but one that I found in a local liquor store. You see, I like to wander. I like to drive randomly through the country, walk aimlessly in the woods, or even let the boat just drift about on the current just to find out where I end up and to find new places that I might not otherwise have found if I were operating with a purpose and destination. And sometimes I let my wanderlust take hold in the liquor store and I'll just grab a bottle I never tried before or even that I've never even heard of before. So a few weeks ago, I did just that and I picked up 3 bottles I've never heard of before and started giving them a try. And on today's Bourbon Break, I'll be talking about one of those bottles, and that's Rowan's Creek Kentucky Bourbon. And admittedly, I will admit that I probably should have heard of Rowan's Creek Kentucky Bourbon before because it's one of several small batch boutique bourbons that Willett Distilling Company turns out. And since I've reviewed other bourbons from their catalog, such as my review of Kentucky Vintage back in episode 1.1, the one with George Poveromo, or excuse me, 1.10, it's still the same one with George Poveromo. Anyway, you'd think I would have remembered seeing it in my perusal of the Willett holdings, particularly since, as it turns out, Rowan's Creek Kentucky Bourbon is Willett's best-selling bourbon. But I apparently didn't know any of this and discovered it in my liquor store walkabout. So I tried the Rowan's Creek Kentucky Bourbon and learned a bit more about it. And given my interest in the origin stories of bourbons and whiskeys, I did a little reading about Rowan's Creek Kentucky Bourbon. So there's nothing overly exciting about the naming of the bourbon, as it turns out that Rowan's Creek is the name of the creek that runs through or is adjacent to the Willett Distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky. The distillery itself, though, was founded in 1936 by Thomas Willett. So basically, Mr. Willett started the distillery 3 years after the repeal of Prohibition. But the Rowan's Creek Kentucky Bourbon is named for the river by the distillery property. But the interesting part is that if you remember the lyrics to that old Stephen Foster song, you remember Stephen Foster, right? The guy who was known as the father of American music, the guy who wrote, "Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me." Or what about "The Camptown Race is 5 miles long"? Oh, but that song will never be the same as when Lyle, played by Burton Gilliam, tries to get Bart, played by Cleavon Little in Blazing Saddles, to sing Camptown Races. Just a classic, fantastic scene in an iconic movie, the Camptown Races. But Stephen Foster also wrote Old Folks at Home, you know, the Swanee River song, way down upon the Swanee River. Well, I got to tell you a quick story about the Old Folks at Home song. You see, I live just down the road from the Swanee River. I fish there a lot, and I scuba dive the springs there a lot. And when you're driving in the area, every time that the road passes over the Swanee River, there's a sign indicating that this is the Swanee River that Foster wrote about, and there's a small piece of sheet music on the signs. However, when the state first put up these signs, the music was just a couple of random notes, not the actual music of Old Folks at Home. Well, my grandmother, who is a music teacher in Jacksonville, thought this was really wrong, and she petitioned the Florida State Legislature to revise the sign to have the actual correct musical notes so we Floridians wouldn't look to be, well, you know, morons. And the state did just that, and they changed the sign, so now the music on the sign is actually the music from the song. So every time we drive past one of those signs in my family, we say, "Thanks, Grandma." Anyway, back to Rowan's Creek Kentucky Bourbon and Stephen Foster. So you know his song, "My Old Kentucky Home"? Well, that song was originally titled Poor Uncle Tom, Good Night, and is the state song of Kentucky. Well, in that song, the home that is sung about, the Old Kentucky Home, refers to the home of John Rowan, a 19th century politician from Bardstown and for whom the Rowan Creek was named, and in turn, the reference in the name of Rowan's Creek Kentucky Bourbon. Oh, by the way, when Foster wrote Old Folks at Home, he'd never even been to the Swanee River. He just picked the name off a map because it fit the meter of his song. Anyway, after all of that, I did indeed try the Rowan's Creek Kentucky Bourbon and have a few things to say about it. First, you have to love the label on this bottle. It's made to look like it's handwritten, and there's a squiggly line across it that I suppose is supposed to look like Rowan's Creek on a hand-drawn map. So I used Google Maps and took a look at the actual Rowan's Creek, which links up with Beach Fork and Town Creek, and I suppose lines on the bottle look a bit like that map. Now, the bottle also tells a bit of the story about John Rowan, and it also tells us that the bourbon is 50.05% alcohol, or 100.1 proof. I'm not sure why they account for that 0.1% above 100 proof, but, whatever. Beyond that, there's not much info at all. No mash bill, no identification of aging other than to say the bourbon has been aged in charred oak barrels, but no idea for how long. The bourbon itself has a deep amber eye, leaning into the browns more than the yellows of an amber, though. The nose is herbal, a bit fruity, like apples or pears. There's a tinge of toasted brown sugar here, too. I'm assuming that the sweetness of the nose exposes a corn-heavy mash bill. And that hint of sweet carries over to the palate as it opens up with a caramel and honey-dominant flavor. There's a bit of smoke here, too, from the oak, but it's subtle and it's pleasant. There's a good alcohol burn here, but it's 100 proof bourbon, so you'd expect that. Excuse me. It's 100.1 proof bourbon. Oh boy, can you taste and feel that extra 1/10 of alcohol percentage. The finish isn't very long, and the sweet and the oak linger the most, but the finish doesn't emerge as anything different from the taste. That is, the finish is consistent with the rest of the palate range. It is a smooth finish, though, one that is pleasant and inviting, as though encouraging another drink. Overall, the Rowan's Creek Kentucky Bourbon Whiskey is a very nice, very pleasant bourbon, to the extent that I wish I had discovered it earlier, but I'm glad that I've found it now. It's one of those bourbons that I like having on the shelf because it's a great straight pour that makes for an enjoyable sipping whiskey. And I plan on taking advantage of knowing that and doing a lot more sipping of the Rowan's Creek, particularly since this bottle ranges from about $35 to $45, depending on where you find it. All right, well, that about does it for my bourbon break review of the Rowan's Creek Kentucky Bourbon. But before I wrap this up, and as my usual disclaimer, as always, please keep in mind that the Fishing Professor Bourbon Break reviews are not sponsored. The distillers have not sent me samples, nor do they influence my reviews at all. Though I am always open to sponsorship, bribery, and extortion, the bourbons I review are purchased out of pocket, and my reviews are based on the keen sense of bourbon know-how developed over many years in many of this country's finest watering holes, drinking establishments, dives, pubs, honky-tonks, and back alley speakeasies. And yes, speaking of, let me give a quick shout out to O'Sullivan's Wharf on the banks of Knitting Mill Creek that runs off the Lafayette River in Norfolk, Virginia. The Lafayette feeds into the Elizabeth River that feeds into the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, and O'Sullivan's recently closed after decades of pouring beer and whiskey to locals who could chow down on local oysters and seafood while drinking and listening to the various Jimmy Buffett wannabe acoustic guitarists crooning out mangled versions of Eagles songs and Irish sea shanties. Now, O'Sullivan's Mile High nachos were epic, and all of us 80s teenagers were perpetually grateful for O'Sullivan's willingness to never card us. And hey, just remember, who loves not women, wine, and song, he will be a fool his whole life long. As always, if you've got comments about this week's Bourbon Break, feel free to email me at sid@inventivefishing.com. Let's get back to casting. All right, my listening crew, it is time for this week's top 10 list. And this week's list is flying high because this week I want to take a look at my top 10 favorite flying fish imitators. And let me forewarn you that designing a decent flying fish lure is a tough task, not just because there's so many varieties of flying fish around the world, but because designing a lure that mimics a fish that moves with its large wing-like pectoral fins extended can be a designer nightmare. Plus, you've got a species of fish that spends time both in the water and out of the water. Now, I will also say that part of my motivation for this week's top 10 is driven by an article I wrote for Florida Sportsman magazine about flying fish, which also minimally addresses flying fish lures. So after writing that piece, I got to thinking more about the lures themselves and why flying fish lures are themselves an interesting category of lures. I should also say that I have a fascination with flying fish. When my wife and I bought our property in north central Florida, I told her I wanted to call the place Flying Fish Farm. And that's because every time I see a flying fish leap from the water and skip across the surface, I know I'm right where I need to be, right where I want to be. That feels like home to me. One of my email addresses, in fact, has been flyingfish194 for over a decade, and I know my next tattoo will be a flying fish. Throughout my life, flying fish have been a source of inspiration, fascination, and obsession. They are a remarkable fish, graceful, endurant, and beautiful. They can be found in every ocean on the earth, but like most of us, they prefer tropical and subtropical waters. For the offshore angler, flying fish can be a great sign for locating game fish, and when they can be caught, they make great offshore baits. So, to understand flying fish lures, I think there's a reason to take a minute or two to think about flying fish themselves. Now, flying fish are primary forage for a variety of game fish, including dolphin, tuna, marlin, wahoo, sailfish, and mackerel. They're also eaten by porpoises and birds, particularly frigate birds who grab them from the air when the flying fish flies. As kids, we used to count how long the flying fish jumping out of the water, out of the way of our hull, would stay airborne. And in 2008, a Japanese film crew filmed a single flying fish staying aloft for 45 seconds. And this is believed to be the longest recorded flight of a flying fish. There are over 64 species of flying fish around the world. Flying fish don't actually fly in the way a bird flies. Instead, they propel themselves just below the water's surface until they have enough momentum to jump from the water and skim along just above the water's surface. Research shows that flying fish needs to attain a speed of at least 35 to 37 miles per hour before they're able to launch into a glide. And once airborne, they use their large wing-like pectoral fins to glide in the same way a paper airplane does. Flying fish also use the slight updrafts created by the movement of the water. So swells and waves create updrafts on which flying fish can glide. Once airborne, flying fish use their tails for added thrust that they gain by waving their tails back and forth very quickly. Flying fish, in fact, wave their tails back and forth at about 50 to 70 beats per second, creating a vibration that pushes them to those higher speeds underwater and then offering a degree of thrust while in the air. This rate of tail beating is the equivalent to the wing beat of a hummingbird, most of which beat their wings at 50 to 75 times per second. Now, given that there are so many game fish that crave flying fish, one might think that every lure company out there would be making flying fish imitators. However, given the difficulties in designing a lure that can run true with extended fins, there are very few options for anglers in using artificial flying fish. So here then are the flying fish lures that I think are best designed for mimicking a flying fish and that draw the bite. So at number 10, I'm going to tip my hat to the Fish Razor Flying Fish Spreader Bar Kit. Now, okay, I guess technically this isn't a lure per se, it's a spreader bar teaser, but it's a really good one. It's got a dozen plastic flying fish arranged in a 5-4-3-1 pattern with a trailing marlin range lure that can be rigged with a hook. The flying fish themselves in the spread are 4 and 9-inch molds, giving the visual of the spreader bar a look of variation in a school or possible varying depths of the different flying fish in the school. It's rigged on a heavy-duty spreader bar that will pull true and straight and can handle strikes and fights from large open water fish. Now, this is the only teaser spread I'll have in this top 10, but I thought it was important to start with an acknowledgement of how flying fish imitators can be used in spreader bar presentations, particularly ones to which there can be an added lure at the back for a hookup. Okay, at number 9, let's wave a fin at Ocean Legacy's Keeling Lure. And okay, I get that maybe including the Ocean's Legacy Keeling Lure or other lures like this might be cheating in the list just a bit, because the Ocean's Legacy Keeling Lure is really just a sinking stick bait that happens to be painted like a Pacific flying fish. In fact, you can get the Ocean's Legacy Keeling lures in other colors like pink and blue, which have zero resemblance to a flying fish. But I want to include the Ocean's Legacy Keeling lure flying fish model here because its visual is designed to mimic a flying fish, just with the pectoral fins tucked in tight rather than extended in flight. And yeah, I get it. This is tantamount to me taking a stick bait and painting it to look like an armadillo and claiming it's an armadillo imitator. Nonetheless, I'm keeping it in the list because I like the visual mimic of a flying fish. I also like this lure because it's weighted well and casts well and has a great action when retrieved. Okay, at number 8, I've got the California Flyer lure. Now, first, I got to say, I love the California Flyer logo. And if it weren't a copyrighted company logo, it's a design I would consider using as that tattoo that I said I wanted in order to express my adoration of flying fish. But logo aside, The California Flyer is a fantastic flying fish lure. It's constructed from a durable rubber, and the extended pectoral fins can be replaced if they're damaged or worn out. And each lure comes with 10 sets of spare wings. Now, I do have to say that this is a premium lure, and it carries a premium price tag of about $200 per lure kit. But don't let that price fool you. This is an in-demand lure, and they can be hard to find. It is a fantastic flying fish imitator. Okay, at number 7, let's go with the GZ's Lures, Niyama Lures Dark Blue Black Flying Fish with Silicone Wings. This is a really smartly designed lure. What it basically is a traditional bullet head trolling lure with a silicone skirt. However, the bullet head has a slit just behind the eyes through which a set of high-strength silicone pectoral fins or wings is attached to the lure so that it runs like a flying fish with its wings extended. Add to that the really dynamic and realistic looking paint job on the bullet head, and the GZ Lures, Niyama Lures, Dark Blue, Black Flying Fish with silicone wings brings a remarkable level of visual realism to the lure. This lure works well independent of a spreader rig, or it can be used like a bird teaser. But when rigged with a single hook rig, it's a fantastic lure for targeting tuna, marlin, and other pelagics. I've also heard of anglers rigging it under a kite for sailfish. This is a newer addition to the Flying Fish Imitators competition, having only been released, I think, about 2 years ago, but it's rapidly earning a reputation as a top-tier flying fish imitator. Okay, add number 6. Let me give props to the Isla Mirada Flyer Flying Fish Lure with Wings. This is basically a basic trolling lure made with a composite head with big eyes and then a mylar skirt with the coloration of a flying fish. However, it's a lot lighter than other epoxy or metal-headed trolling lures, so it rides high on the troll and pops out of the water like a flying fish riding just under the surface and jumping out frequently. I also like that these lures come in 2 sizes, a small version that has a single skirt and a larger version that is double skirted. You can also buy them unrigged or rigged, and the small rigged version comes with a 1/4 ounce egg weight, a 7/0 J hook, and 6 feet of mono leader. And the large version comes rigged with a 3/8 ounce egg weight and 8/0 hook with also the same 6 feet of mono leader. Okay, rolling in at number 5, let's go with Magbay's Yummy Flyer Flying Fish Lures. The Yummy Flying Fish are designed with tuna in mind, but are just as effective on mahi, wahoo, and billfish. They're made from a durable soft plastic and really work well under a kite. They're available in 5 color options, and they can be purchased unrigged, rigged, or rigged for a kite with a stinger rig. Now, the one thing you'll want to be attentive to if you're ordering these from the Magbay website is that the Yummy Flyer Flying Fish that are pre-rigged are rigged with the hook exiting the belly of the lure facing down, while the one rigged for kite fishing with a stinger hook, the primary hook exits the lure up through the dorsal area of the lure and points up. If you prefer your hook facing up, you can buy the rigged for kite fishing version and remove the stinger rig if you like. All right, add number 4. You know, I've become a fan of the Frenzy Ballistic Flying Fish. This is another great flying fish imitator that really works well under a kite. I also like that these flying fish imitators are molded as a single piece, including the extended pectoral fins or the wings. The molding has a board outline for easy rigging, but you can also purchase them pre-rigged. All right, at number 3, let me give props to Carolina Lures Yummy Floating Flying Fish. This is a lure designed for trolling, but it can be fished under a kite or a balloon. It's a single-piece lure that features fully extended wings. It has great action as it skips across the surface on the troll, and its design allows lures to right itself. The design allows the lure to right itself in the water after each jump, making it a consistent lure that runs upright and true on the troll. The Yummy Floating Flying Fish also have these great eyes that have moving pupils, and there's just a lot of great movement in the tail on the roll. It comes rigged with a 9/0 hook and a 200-pound leader. Okay, so that brings us to the runner-up position. And for that, let's go back to another great Magbay lure, and that's the Magbay Frequent Flyer 14-inch Floating Flying Fish. This is a powerhouse of a lure. It's a 14-inch flying fish designed to mimic California flying fish. It's designed with built-in flotation, so it stays at the surface no matter how you fish it. It's great for kite fishing, but also holds its own as a trolling lure. Comes rigged with an 11-aught tuna hook and a large 5X treble hook on the stinger. One of the unique design elements of the frequent flyer is that it does have a fully extended pectoral fins or wings, which are attached to the lure's main body by a way of a semi-flexible rod. So the wings stay open and flex in the current, but they are also out of the way when you get a strike, or if the hook on the stinger rig that it comes with moves around depending on the speed at which you're trolling the lure, so that it doesn't get snagged on the wings. This is a seriously well-designed lure, and it is designed for some serious big game fishing. All right, that brings us to my number one flying fish lure. But before we get to that reveal, let's fly back across the first 9 in my list as a recap. At number 10, Fish Razor's Flying Fish Spreader Bar Kit. At 9, Ocean Legacy's Keeling Lure. At 8, California Flyer 9-inch Baby Flyer. At 7, GZ Lures, Niyama Lures Dark Blue Black Flying Fish Silicone Wings. At 6, Isla Morada Flyer. This is the flying fish lure with the wings also here. At 5, Magbay's Yummy Flyer Flying Fish Lures. At 4, Frenzy Ballistic Flying Fish. At 3, Carolina Lures Yummy Floating Flying Fish. At number 2, Magbay's Frequent Flyer 14-inch Floating Flying Fish. And that brings us to the Fishing Professor's number one flying fish lure. And it's a new offering from that fantastic lure company, Nomad Designs. I'm talking about the new Nomad Designs Slipstream. Now, the Slipstream is new to the market, but it is already being heralded as an inventive top of the food chain flying fish imitator. It's a hybrid lure that can be trolled, cast, or run under a kite or balloon. Its unique design features folding and replaceable wings, so the wings fold back when casting to reduce resistance and increase castability. And that folding action also helps when fighting a fish because the folded wings create less resistance in the water against your pull. It's also designed with a through body rigging, so you can rig it like a conventional skirted lure, and it will slide up the leader when you're fighting a fish. I have to say, too, that all of the flying fish imitators out there on the market, of all those out there already, the Slipstream has the best color options, particularly when you look at the absolutely amazing wing colorations in this set. And speaking of the wings, given that the Slipstream's wings are replaceable, you can switch out worn wings very easily, so the lure remains a very viable and active lure in your arsenal. This is one of those lures, in fact, that I recommend you take a look at on the Nomad Design web pages or the videos on YouTube. It really is just watching the videos to see what a great lure this is. So those are my top 10 flying fish imitators for fishing under kites, balloons, or trolling, or casting, or even a spreader rig in there. As usual, if you want to let me know your thoughts about this week's top 10, or if you're having flying fish lures that you think I should be looking at, or if you're a manufacturer and you want me to alert me to your lure, just send me an email at sid@inventivefishing.com. And as always, if you'd like a Fishing Professor's top 10 about a particular fishing related thing, just shoot me an email and I'll see about adding it to my list for future top 10s. And that's it for the top 10 week for this week. So let's get back to casting. See you later, alligator. After a while, crocodile. I see you later, alligator. So long, that's all, goodbye. Yes, indeed, I think it's time to say goodbye for this week because we have had a fun, fantastic episode of the Rodcast this week. And as much as it pains me to stop talking about fishing, I think your ears might need a break from my melodious voice. Hey, I want to thank Kevin Landers of the American Tackle Company for having me into the ATC facility for that great conversation about fishing rods. And I do recommend that if you're in the Orlando area on vacation or just passing through, swing over to Ovieda and check out the ATC showroom. And like I said at the beginning of the Rodcast, if you're an inshore angler that uses artificial shrimp, be sure to check out ATC's Pro Staff Rattling Shrimp. They are great shrimp imitators. And no, Kevin neither paid me to say that, nor did he threaten me if I refused to say it. I did it because I really dig those lures. I do hope you enjoyed my thoughts and words about Rowan Creek, Kentucky bourbon, and I hope that my countdown of my top 10 flying fish imitators was informative to some degree or another. Now, before I sign off today, I do have a message for our brothers and sisters out there behind the line. The bait shop is closed. I say again, the bait shop is closed. And that just about does it for this week's episode of the Fishing Professor Rodcast. Be sure to look for next week's episode, which will appear on Wednesday next week, almost like magic. And I hope you and all members of the listening crew will spread the word about the Rodcast. And of course, if you have a comment or a question about anything on this week's show or have recommendations for future Top 10s, Bourbon Breaks interviews, or information about specific fishing-related issues, please feel free to email me at sid@inventivefishing.com or leave a reply in any of the comment sections for any of the podcast platforms you use to listen to the Rodcast. Hey, also be sure to follow Inventive Fishing on Twitter, Instagram, and friend us on Facebook at Inventive Fishing. And be sure to check out all the great video content over on the Inventive Fishing YouTube channel, which includes great gear reviews, new product introductions, a whole bunch of other great content, and this podcast. I'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, this is Sid Dobrin, the Fishing Professor. Fish on.
The Fishing Professor Show is copyrighted by Inventive Fishing, LLC. Any rebroadcast of the podcast without the consent from Inventive Fishing, LLC is strictly prohibited. Fish on!